I was only 21 when I stood before the mighty walls of Constantinople. For centuries, this city had defied empires, but I believed it was destined to be mine. At dawn, the thunder of my cannons shook the earth, and my soldiers cried out in unison. The defenders thought their walls would never fall, but I had brought a new age of war. On May 29, 1453, I, Mehmed, son of Murad, entered Constantinople not as a raider, but as a conqueror. I was born in the year 1432, under the watchful eyes of Allah and the expectations of a dynasty that had ruled for generations. My father, Sultan Murad II, was a warrior of great renown, a man who had expanded our territories and secured our borders. But even as a child, I knew that my destiny was not merely to maintain what had been built, it was to achieve what had been dreamed of for 8 centuries. Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, the city that had stood unconquered since its founding, would fall to me. This was not arrogance speaking, it was certainty, planted in my heart by the words of the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, who had said, Constantinople will surely be conquered. How wonderful that commander will be, and how wonderful that army will be. I would be that commander. My army would be that blessed force. From my earliest years, my tutors filled my mind with knowledge, not just of war and statecraft, but of languages, philosophy, mathematics, and the sciences of both East and West. I learned to speak Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and Serbian. I studied the great military campaigns of Alexander, Caesar, and the early caliphs. My father ensured I understood that to conquer the world's greatest city, I would need more than swords and courage. I would need intellect, strategy, and the ability to unite diverse peoples under a single banner. When I first ascended to the throne at the tender age of 12, I was too young, too untested. My father returned to power after only a brief period, and I was sent away to learn humility and patience. But those years were not wasted. They hardened me, sharpened my mind, and deepened my resolve. When my father died in 1451 and I took the throne once more at 19, I was no longer a boy. I was a sultan with a singular purpose. The Byzantine Empire was dying. Its territories had shrunk to little more than the city of Constantinople itself and a few scattered holdings. The once mighty empire that had dominated the world for a millennium was now a shadow, surviving only through diplomacy and the hope that its legendary walls would continue to protect it. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos was a brave man, I grant him that, but he ruled over a corpse. His city was surrounded by my grandfather's and father's conquests. It was an island in an Ottoman sea, and I would not rest until it was absorbed completely. The moment I secured my throne, I began preparations. I knew that Constantinople could not be taken by conventional means. Its walls, built by Emperor Theodosius II in the 5th century, had repelled countless sieges. The Theodosian walls stretched for miles, featuring a complex system of moats, outer walls, inner walls, and towers. They had withstood Avars, Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and even the might of Arab caliphates at their peak. To breach them would require something unprecedented. I turned to a brilliant Hungarian engineer named Urban. He had first approached the Byzantines, offering to build them cannons, but they could not afford his price. When he came to me, I welcomed him with open arms and filled his purse with gold. Build me a cannon that can shatter stone itself, I commanded. Build me a weapon that will make the walls of Constantinople tremble. Urban exceeded even my grandest expectations. He constructed the largest cannon the world had ever seen, a monster of bronze that stretched more than 27 feet in length and could fire stone balls weighing over 1,200 pounds. It took 60 oxen and 200 men to move it, and when it fired, the sound could be heard for miles. But this was not enough. I commissioned dozens of cannons of various sizes, creating an artillery park that would transform warfare forever. While Urban forged my cannons, I assembled my army. From every corner of my empire, warriors came, Turks, Serbians, Greeks, Arabs, and many others. I gathered janissaries, my elite infantry corps, trained from youth to be the finest soldiers in the world. I summoned the Sipahi cavalry, mounted warriors whose charges could break enemy lines like waves against sand. I called upon the Bashi bazooks, irregular troops whose ferocity in battle was legendary. In total, I gathered between 80 and 100,000 men, the largest army I could muster. But an army alone would not suffice. Constantinople was protected by the sea on three sides. The Golden Horn, a natural harbor, was blocked by a massive chain that prevented enemy ships from entering. The Byzantine navy, though small, could bring supplies and reinforcements by sea. I needed to control the waters. I ordered the construction of a fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, directly across from Anadolu Hazari, which my great-grandfather Bayezid I had built on the Asian side. This new fortress, Rumeli Hazari, would be positioned at the narrowest point of the Bosphorus, allowing me to control all shipping passing through the strait. I personally oversaw its construction, and within months, an imposing fortress rose from the earth, its towers and walls dominating the waterway. Any ship that attempted to pass without my permission would be destroyed by our cannons. Constantinople was now cut off from the Black Sea, its lifeline severed. Emperor Constantine sent ambassadors protesting this construction, claiming it violated peace treaties. I received them coldly. I build on my own territory, I told them. If your emperor objects, let him try to stop me. They left in silence, knowing war was inevitable. In the spring of 1453, I gave the order to march. My army moved like a great serpent across Thrace, banners flying, drums beating, the earth itself seeming to acknowledge the magnitude of what was to come. I rode at the head of my forces, surrounded by my commanders, my viziers, and my personal guard. My heart thundered in my chest, not with fear, but with anticipation. For 8 centuries, Muslim armies had tried to take Constantinople. I would be the one to succeed. On April 2, my advance forces reached the walls of Constantinople. Within days, my entire army had assembled, and I established my command tent directly opposite the St. Romanus Gate, now known as Topkapi, where the walls were considered weakest. My red and gold pavilion was erected on a hill that gave me a clear view of the city and the battlefield. From there, I would direct every aspect of the siege. I surveyed the walls with my commanders, and I saw the challenge before us. The Theodosian walls were indeed formidable, a moat 40 feet wide, an outer wall 20 feet high, an inner wall 40 feet high and 15 feet thick, and towers that rose even higher. The Byzantines had repaired and reinforced them over the years, and they had positioned their best troops at the most vulnerable points. But I also saw weaknesses. The Byzantine garrison numbered only about 7,000 men, supplemented by perhaps 2,000 foreign fighters, including Genoese and Venetian volunteers. Emperor Constantine had sent desperate pleas for help to the Christian kingdoms of Europe, but little had come. The Pope had promised aid only if the Byzantine Church submitted to Rome, a condition that had divided the city's population. Some Byzantines preferred Ottoman rule to submission to the Catholics. My fleet of ships, numbering over 300 vessels, arrived and blockaded the sea approaches. I had appointed Suleiman Baltoglu, an experienced admiral, to command the fleet. His orders were clear: prevent any ships from entering or leaving the city, cut off all supplies, and support the land siege however possible. On April 6, I gave the order to begin the bombardment. The earth shook as my cannons roared to life. Urban's great cannon fired its first shot, and I watched with satisfaction as the massive stone ball arced through the air and smashed into the walls, sending debris flying. The Byzantines scrambled to repair the damage, but I ordered continuous bombardment. Day and night, my cannons fired, each shot weakening the ancient stones, each explosion bringing us closer to victory. After several days of bombardment, I ordered the first major assault on April 7. My troops surged forward with ladders and siege towers, screaming battle cries, eager to prove themselves. The Byzantines met them with fierce resistance. They poured boiling oil and burning pitch down on my soldiers, shot arrows and crossbow bolts, hurled stones and barrels of explosives. My men fought valiantly, but the walls held. Wave after wave crashed against the defenses, and wave after wave was repelled. I watched from my command post as hundreds of my soldiers fell. Some of my commanders grew concerned, suggesting we might need to reconsider our approach. But I remained calm. This is but the first test, I told them. The walls will fall. It is only a matter of time. That night, I walked among my wounded, speaking words of encouragement, promising them paradise for their sacrifices. I visited the artillery positions, ordering adjustments to the cannon placements. I consulted with my engineers about undermining the walls. I did not sleep, there would be time for rest after victory. The bombardment continued day after day. Urban's great cannon could fire only 7 times per day because it required hours to cool between shots, and its recoil was so tremendous that it damaged the mounting. But its effect was devastating. Each shot that struck the walls sent shockwaves through the stone, weakening foundations that had stood for 1,000 years. On April 12, disaster struck. Several of my ships attempted to force their way past the boom chain blocking the Golden Horn. They were met by a small Byzantine fleet and, incredibly, were defeated. 4 of my ships were sunk or captured. Admiral Baltoglu retreated in disgrace, and the Byzantine defenders cheered from their walls, their morale lifted by this unexpected victory. I was furious. I summoned Baltoglu to my tent and had him bastinadoed, beaten on the soles of his feet, for his failure. I stripped him of his command and his properties. I could not afford failure, not from my commanders, not from anyone. Every setback gave the defenders hope, and hope could sustain them longer than food or water. But I turned this defeat into opportunity. If I could not sail into the Golden Horn, would transport my ships overland. It seemed impossible, but I had learned that the impossible was merely the difficult waiting to be achieved. I consulted with my engineers and issued orders that stunned even my most loyal commanders. We would build a wooden road from the Bosphorus, up the hill, over the ridge, and down into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain entirely. We would grease the road with animal fat and oil, mount ships on rolling platforms, and pull them overland using teams of oxen and hundreds of men. My men worked through the night. Trees were felled, lumber was shaped, and the road took form. On April 22, under cover of darkness, we began the operation. 70 ships were dragged up the hill and down the other side, a distance of more than a mile. The Byzantines awoke at dawn to see my fleet floating in the Golden Horn, behind their defenses. Their shock was absolute. Now the defenders had to divide their forces. They could no longer concentrate all their troops on the landward walls, they had to defend the sea walls along the Golden Horn as well. I had stretched their thin garrison even thinner. Emperor Constantine, to his credit, did not despair. He attempted to destroy my fleet with fire ships, but my men were vigilant and thwarted the attack. The Byzantines also constructed a floating bridge across the Golden Horn to facilitate the movement of troops, and they continued to repair the walls each night, working desperately to undo the damage my cannons inflicted each day. As April turned to May, the siege entered its 7th week. My cannons had created several breaches in the walls, but the Byzantines repaired them with earth, timber, and barrels filled with stone. Every assault I ordered was thrown back with heavy casualties. My men were exhausted. Supplies were running low. Disease had begun to spread through the camp. It was on the 48th day of the siege that my Grand Vizier, Kandarli Halil Pasha, requested an audience. Halil was an old man, experienced and cautious. He had served my father and had been instrumental in the early years of my reign. But he had opposed this campaign from the beginning, arguing that it was too costly, too risky, too likely to provoke a crusade from Europe. He entered my tent with several other advisors, all wearing expressions of concern. Halil spoke first, his voice measured and diplomatic. "My Sultan, we have fought bravely and well. You have accomplished what no ruler before you could achieve, you have brought Constantinople to its knees, demonstrated the power of our empire, and shown the world that Ottoman arms are invincible. Perhaps now is the time to accept terms. Emperor Constantine has indicated he would pay tribute, recognize your sovereignty, and accept any conditions you impose. We could withdraw with honor, having achieved a great victory without further bloodshed. The tent fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their exhaustion, their doubt, their desire for this ordeal to end. Part of me understood their reasoning. We had lost thousands of men. The walls still stood. European ships might arrive any day to break the blockade. The logical course might be to accept a face-saving compromise. But I am not a logical man, I am a man of destiny. I rose from my seat, and the power in my voice made even Halil step back. You speak of withdrawal. You speak of compromise. Do you not know who I am? Do you not know what we fight for? I strode to the entrance of my tent and pointed toward the walls of Constantinople. For 800 years, Muslim warriors have dreamed of conquering that city. The Prophet Muhammad himself, peace and blessings be upon him, foretold its conquest and praised the commander who would achieve it. Do you think I would abandon that destiny for comfort? For ease? Because old men grow weary. I turned back to face them, and I saw some lower their eyes. The Prophet's words are not empty prophecies, they are promises from Allah himself. He said that Constantinople would fall to Islam, that the commander would be blessed, that the army would be praised. I am that commander. This is that army. We will not retreat. We will not compromise. We will not accept tribute when we can take the entire city. Halil, to his credit, did not back down entirely. My Sultan, wisdom sometimes requires. Wisdom? I interrupted. You speak to me of wisdom? I have studied the campaigns of Alexander, who conquered the known world. I have read the strategies of Caesar, who brought Rome to glory. I have learned from the caliphs who spread Islam from Spain to India. And you know what I learned? That greatness is never achieved by those who turn back when the goal is in sight. I walked among my assembled commanders and advisors, meeting each man's eyes. On the day I was born, my father consulted astrologers and scholars. They told him I was destined for greatness beyond measure. My tutors prepared me not to maintain an empire, but to transform it. Every lesson, every hardship, every moment of my life has led to this siege, to this city, to this moment in history. My voice grew softer but more intense. I have seen the walls crumble under my cannons. I have seen my ships sail where ships should not go. I have seen fear in the eyes of the defenders. They know their time has ended. They know their empire is dead. All that remains is for us to seize what is already ours. I returned to my seat and looked directly at Halil. You fear a crusade from Europe? Let them come. They had years to send help, and where are they? A few hundred Genoese volunteers. A handful of ships. The Christian kingdoms are divided, weak, consumed by their own squabbles. They will not unite for Constantinople, they never have, and they never will. Then I spoke words that I knew would be remembered long after I was dust. We will assault the walls again, and this time, we will not stop until we are inside. If I die in the attempt, let them bury me at the foot of the walls. If my army is destroyed, let it be destroyed in the pursuit of glory rather than preserved in the shame of retreat. But I tell you this, we will not fail. Allah has ordained this victory. The Prophet has blessed this campaign. And I will not be the Sultan who turned away when paradise itself was within reach. The tent erupted in shouts of support. My younger commanders struck their chests and pledged to follow me to death. Even some of the older advisors nodded, inspired by my determination. Halil said nothing more, but I saw in his eyes that he understood his influence had waned. I would prove him wrong, or I would die trying. After that meeting, my resolve spread through the camp like fire through dry grass. I ordered a day of rest for my men, knowing that the final assault would demand everything they had. I walked among the troops, speaking to common soldiers, listening to their concerns, sharing their bread. I wanted them to know that their sultan was not some distant figure but a warrior who would fight beside them. I also sent for my most trusted commanders, Zaganos Pasha, Karcha Pasha, Ishak Pasha, and Mahmud Pasha, and we planned the final assault with meticulous detail. We would attack simultaneously at multiple points, forcing the defenders to spread their limited forces. The main assault would focus on the damaged sections of the wall near the St. Romanus Gate, but we would also attack the Blacherny walls to the north and the sea walls along the Golden Horn. I ordered the construction of mobile siege towers and additional scaling ladders. I had the moat filled in at several points with earth, timber, and debris to allow our troops easier access to the walls. I positioned my best janissaries for the crucial assault, promising them the wealth of the city and eternal glory. I also engaged in psychological warfare. I had drummers beat their drums continuously through the night, preventing the defenders from sleeping. I had bonfires lit throughout my camp so the Byzantines could see the vast size of my army. I ordered demonstrations and feints to keep them nervous and exhausted. On the night of May 27th, I gathered my commanders for a final council. Tomorrow night, we rest, I told them. We pray. We prepare our souls for paradise or victory. And the following day, at dawn on May 29th, we will assault the walls with everything we have. By sunset, Constantinople will be ours, or I will be dead. There is no third option. I spent that night in prayer. I asked Allah to grant me strength, to guide my hand, to make me worthy of the Prophet's blessing. I read from the Quran and reflected on the magnitude of what I was about to attempt. I thought of my father, my grandfather, my ancestors who had built this empire. I thought of the generations of sultans who had dreamed of conquering Constantinople but never dared attempt it. And I knew that I was ready. The morning of May 28 was quiet. I had ordered no bombardment, no attacks, no demonstrations. My men rested, checked their weapons, wrote letters to their families, and made peace with their fates. The Byzantines, too, took advantage of the lull to pray in their churches and repair their walls one final time. Emperor Constantine addressed his troops, urging them to fight for God, for family, for glory. He was a brave man, and I respected him for it. As night fell, I donned my armor and mounted my horse. I rode through the camp, and everywhere I went, men cheered. I saw faces from every corner of my empire, Turks, Greeks, Serbians, Albanians, Arabs, all united under the crescent banner. I saw janissaries sharpening their swords, Sipahis adjusting their armor, Bashi bazooks dancing and singing before battle. I saw engineers preparing the cannons for one final bombardment, and I saw priests and imams blessing the troops. At midnight, I ordered the cannons to begin. The night exploded with thunder and fire. Urban's great cannon fired repeatedly, joined by dozens of smaller pieces. The walls shook and crumbled under the onslaught. Sections that had been damaged and repaired were destroyed again. The Byzantines worked frantically to shore up the defenses, but the bombardment was too intense, too sustained. At 1:30 in the morning, I gave the order to attack. The first wave consisted of Bashi bazooks and irregular troops, brave but expendable. Their purpose was to exhaust the defenders, to use up their ammunition, to force them to show their positions. They surged forward with ladders and grappling hooks, screaming battle cries, and threw themselves at the walls. The Byzantines met them with everything they had, arrows, crossbow bolts, stones, boiling oil, Greek fire. The carnage was terrible. Hundreds of my men fell, but they did not retreat. They climbed over the bodies of their comrades, they scaled the walls, they fought hand to hand on the ramparts. After 2 hours, I sounded the retreat for the first wave and immediately sent in the second, Anatolian Turks, more disciplined and better equipped. Fresh troops replaced exhausted defenders. The assault continued without pause, giving the Byzantines no rest, no time to regroup. I watched from my command post as my men fought and died, and I felt both pride and anguish. But I could not waver. I could not show doubt. At dawn, I sent in my janissaries. These were my finest soldiers, trained since childhood, fanatically loyal, superbly skilled. They advanced in perfect formation, their ranks closing as men fell, their discipline unbreakable. At their head was Hassan Oyabadli, a giant of a man who had sworn to be the first over the walls or die trying. Hassan led the charge toward a damaged section of the wall near the St. Romanus Gate. He planted our banner on the rampart and defended it single-handedly against a dozen Byzantine soldiers. He was wounded multiple times, but he refused to fall. His courage inspired the men around him, and more janissaries poured onto the walls. Then disaster nearly struck. A small gate, the Kirkaporta, which had been left unlocked during a Byzantine sortie, was discovered by some of my soldiers. They rushed through, finding themselves inside the city. But they were too few and were quickly cut down. The Byzantines realized their mistake and secured the gate, but the psychological impact was enormous. For a moment, we had been inside Constantinople. I saw the walls beginning to crumble under the weight of my assault. I saw Byzantine defenders faltering, their numbers dwindling, their exhaustion evident. Emperor Constantine himself fought on the walls, side by side with his men, refusing to abandon his post even as the situation grew hopeless. It was then that Hassan Oyabadli fell. He had been wounded mortally but had held the banner aloft until his strength finally failed. As he collapsed, another janissary grabbed the standard and held it high. The symbolism was not lost on anyone: one warrior falls, another takes his place, and the banner never touches the ground. Around 8:30 in the morning, the critical breakthrough occurred. Near the St. Romanus Gate, where the walls had been most heavily damaged, a group of janissaries led by Zaganos Pasha finally overwhelmed the defenders. They poured through the breach, swords and axes flashing, and began fighting their way into the city. Other sections of the wall began to fall. The sea walls along the Golden Horn were scaled. The Blacherny walls to the north gave way. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, seeing that all was lost, reportedly tore off his imperial regalia and threw himself into the final combat, preferring death to capture. He died fighting, his body never identified with certainty, buried among the countless dead. I later ordered a search for his remains to give him an honorable burial, but he was never found. He died as an emperor should, defending his city to the last. By mid-morning, the battle was over. My flag flew from the highest towers. My soldiers controlled the walls, the gates, and the streets. I had ordered that looting be permitted for 3 days, as was the custom, and my men had earned their reward. But I also ordered that important buildings, particularly the Hagia Sophia, be protected from damage. I mounted my horse and rode toward the city. The gates were opened before me, and I entered Constantinople, not as a visitor, not as a supplicant, but as its conqueror. My heart swelled with emotions I cannot adequately describe. Pride, certainly. Relief. Joy. But also a profound sense of destiny fulfilled, as if every moment of my life had been a path leading to this instant. I rode through streets littered with the debris of battle. I saw my soldiers celebrating, carrying treasures, embracing in victory. I saw Byzantine civilians cowering in fear, uncertain of their fate. I rode to the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral that had stood for nearly 1,000 years as the crown jewel of Christendom. I dismounted and entered the magnificent structure. The mosaics glittered in the light streaming through the high windows. The dome seemed to touch the sky itself. I was awestruck by its beauty, and I immediately declared that it would be converted into a mosque and preserved for all time. I would not allow this marvel to be destroyed or neglected. I walked to the center of the cathedral and picked up a handful of dust, sprinkling it on my head as a sign of humility before Allah. This victory was not mine alone, it was Allah's will made manifest. I prostrated myself in prayer, thanking the Almighty for granting me this triumph, for making me the instrument of His design. I then issued orders to halt the looting. 3 days was customary, but I decided that 1 day was enough. I wanted to demonstrate that I was not merely a conqueror but a ruler, a builder, a protector. I declared that all residents of Constantinople who had not fled would be safe, that their properties would be protected, that they could continue to practice their religion. I invited those who had fled to return, promising them security and prosperity. I appointed governors, established order, and began the transformation of Constantinople into Istanbul, the new capital of my empire. I ordered the repair of damaged buildings, the restoration of infrastructure, and the resettlement of the city with people from across my domains, Muslims, Christians, and Jews living side by side. In the days following the conquest, I walked through every quarter of the city, examining its churches, palaces, cisterns, and walls. I was amazed by what the Romans and Byzantines had built. The underground cisterns were engineering marvels. The palaces were filled with treasures and knowledge. The libraries contained manuscripts that would take lifetimes to study. I ordered that scholars be brought to catalog and preserve these treasures. I established madrasas and schools. I invited artists, architects, philosophers, and scientists from across the world to make Istanbul their home. I wanted my capital to be not just a military stronghold but a center of learning, culture, and civilization. Grand Vizier Halil Pasha, who had counseled retreat, was arrested shortly after the conquest on charges of treason and corruption. Whether he was truly guilty or whether I simply could no longer tolerate his opposition, I leave to historians to debate. He was executed, and I appointed Zaganos Pasha, who had fought so valiantly in the final assault, as my new Grand Vizier. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through the Christian world. The Pope called for a crusade, but it never materialized. The Italian city-state sent congratulations rather than armies, more interested in trade agreements than religious war. The rulers of Europe were too divided, too weak, too consumed by their own conflicts to challenge me. I continued my conquests, expanding my empire further into Europe, Anatolia, and the Balkans. I conquered Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, and parts of Greece. I built fortresses, established trade routes, and created a bureaucracy that would sustain my empire for centuries. But no conquest, no victory, no achievement ever matched the glory of May 29, 1453. Now, years later, as I look back on that day, I understand that I was not merely taking a city, I was ending an era and beginning another. The Roman Empire, which had ruled the world for nearly 2,000 years in one form or another, died that day. The medieval age, with its feudal kingdoms and crusader states, began its final decline. A new world was born, one where gunpowder and cannons would reshape warfare, where empires would rise and fall with unprecedented speed, where the center of power would shift forever. I was 21 years old when I stood before those walls. Many said I was too young, too ambitious, too foolish to attempt what my elders had deemed impossible. But youth is not weakness, it is the fire that dares to challenge the world. I refused to accept the limitations that others placed upon me. I refused to believe that because something had never been done, it could never be done. When Kandarli Halil Pasha urged me to retreat, he spoke from experience and caution. He had served my father and grandfather, seen campaigns fail, seen armies destroyed by overreach. His counsel was not cowardice, it was wisdom born of bitter lessons. But there comes a moment in every great endeavor when wisdom must yield to will, when caution must give way to courage, when the possible must be discarded in pursuit of the impossible. I knew that if I retreated, Constantinople might stand for another century, another millennium. Future sultans might besiege it again and fail again, and the city would become a symbol of Ottoman impotence rather than Byzantine strength. But if I succeeded, if I could accomplish what Muawiyah, Harun al-Rashid, and my own ancestors could not, then I would transform my dynasty from a regional power into a world empire. The Prophet Muhammad's blessing was not merely a prediction, it was a responsibility. If Allah had decreed that Constantinople would fall to Islam, then it was my sacred duty to be the instrument of that decree. To turn back would be to reject divine will, to declare myself unworthy of the role destiny had assigned me. I think often about Emperor Constantine XI. He could have fled. He could have boarded a ship and escaped to Italy or the Morea, lived out his days as an emperor in exile, perhaps even rebuilt a court in exile that kept Byzantine traditions alive. But he chose to die with his city, to share the fate of his people, to fall fighting rather than live in shame. I respect that choice. History will remember him not as the emperor who lost Constantinople, but as the last Roman emperor, who died defending Rome's legacy. The conquest cost me nearly 5,000 men, though some chronicles claim the number was higher. Every one of those deaths weighs on my soul. I remember walking through the camp after the battle, seeing the wounded being tended, the dead being prepared for burial, the grief of men who had lost brothers and friends. Victory has a price, and it is always paid in blood. I ordered that all who died in the siege be honored as martyrs. I established endowments to support their families. I had a great tomb built for Hassan al-Yabatli and others who had distinguished themselves in battle. Their sacrifice made my empire possible, and I would not allow them to be forgotten. But I do not dwell on the cost, for the prize was beyond measure. Constantinople, Istanbul, became the beating heart of my empire. Its strategic location, controlling the straits between Europe and Asia, between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, made it the perfect capital for an empire that spanned 3 continents. I transformed the city. I built mosques, palaces, markets, and caravanserais. I established the Grand Bazaar, which became one of the largest and most vibrant marketplaces in the world. I constructed the Topkapi Palace, which would serve as the seat of Ottoman power for 4 centuries. I restored the city walls, repaired the aqueducts, and cleaned the cisterns that provided water to the population. I invited Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and Muslims to settle in the city. I granted religious freedoms that were unheard of in Europe at the time. The Greek Orthodox Patriarch was given authority over Christian communities. Jewish refugees, expelled from Spain and Portugal, found safe haven in my empire. I wanted Istanbul to be a cosmopolitan center where diverse peoples could live, trade, and prosper together. Being a conqueror is not merely about winning battles. It is about building something that outlasts your own life, creating institutions and systems that endure long after you turn to dust. I spent the decades following the conquest expanding my territories, but I also codified laws, reformed the administration, patronized the arts, and promoted learning. I commissioned the construction of the Fatih Mosque complex, one of the great architectural achievements of my reign. I established madrasas where students studied the Quran, hadith, fiqh, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. I collected manuscripts from across the known world, building libraries that preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. I was not a perfect ruler. I was harsh, sometimes cruel. I executed rivals, crushed rebellions, demanded absolute obedience. But I also understood that an empire cannot be held together by fear alone. It requires justice, prosperity, and a shared vision of greatness. My subjects needed to believe that they were part of something larger than themselves, something worth sacrificing for, something worth building. I return always to the words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Constantinople will surely be conquered. How wonderful that commander will be, and how wonderful that army will be. I do not claim to be wonderful. I was a man, flawed, ambitious, driven by ego as much as by faith. But I was also chosen by fate, shaped by history, and blessed by circumstances to achieve what no one before me could accomplish. Whether I deserve the Prophet's praise, I leave to Allah to judge. I know only that I did not shirk from the responsibility placed upon me. My army, too, deserves the Prophet's praise. They endured 53 days of siege, waves of assault, disease, exhaustion, and doubt. They followed me even when the path seemed impossible, even when their own commanders urged retreat. They believed in me, and in turn, I gave them a victory that would echo through the ages. If I could speak to future generations, to the sultans who will inherit the throne I have secured, I would tell them this. First, never accept the limitations that others place upon you. The world is full of people who will tell you what cannot be done, what has never been done, what should not even be attempted. These voices come from good men, experienced men, wise men, but they are still voices of limitation. Constantinople was impregnable for 8 centuries. Thousands of warriors had broken themselves against its walls. To attempt it again was considered madness. Yet here I stand, ruler of that very city, because I refuse to accept that the past determined the future. Second, preparation is the foundation of victory. I did not simply march to Constantinople with an army and hope for the best. I spent 2 years preparing, building cannons, constructing fortresses, assembling forces, studying the defenses, planning every detail. When Urban offered to build me the greatest cannon in the world, I did not hesitate to pay his price, though it emptied my treasury. When my engineers said ships could not be moved overland, I ordered them to find a way, and they did. Victory favors not just the brave, but the prepared. Third, know when to ignore counsel and when to heed it. Kandarli Halil Pasha was not wrong to counsel caution. His concerns were legitimate, the siege was costly, the outcome uncertain, the risk of European intervention real. A lesser ruler might have listened to him and withdrawn, claiming a moral victory. But I knew in my heart that this was the moment, that every factor had aligned, that if I turned back, the opportunity might never come again. A sultan must listen to his advisors, but he must also trust his own judgment and be willing to stake everything on that trust. Fourth, lead from the front, but command from the mind. I positioned my tent where I could see the entire battlefield. I rode among my troops to inspire them, but I did not throw myself recklessly into combat. A dead commander cannot lead his army to victory. I balanced personal courage with strategic necessity. I let my soldiers see that I shared their dangers, but I also ensured that I survived to make the decisions that would win the war. Fifth, victory requires sacrifice. 5,000 of my men died taking Constantinople. Thousands more were wounded. Urban's great cannon exploded during the siege, killing him and his crew. Hassan Ulyabatli gave his life planting my banner on the walls. Every great achievement demands a price, and a leader must be willing to pay it, not just with the lives of his soldiers, but with his own sweat, blood, and sleepless nights. If you are not willing to sacrifice everything, you do not deserve to achieve anything. Sixth, consolidate your victories. Taking Constantinople was not enough, I had to transform it, rebuild it, make it truly mine. I spent years after the conquest establishing Istanbul as my capital, bringing in settlers, restoring its glory, making it the center of my empire. A victory that is not followed by wise governance is merely a raid, not a conquest. You must build on what you have won, or it will crumble in your hands. Seventh, respect your enemies. Emperor Constantine XI fought bravely and died honorably. The Byzantine soldiers and citizens defended their city with courage that earned my admiration. After the conquest, I treated the survivors with mercy, not cruelty. I preserved their churches, protected their property, and invited them to become valued subjects of my empire. Cruelty breeds rebellion, respect breeds loyalty. An empire built on fear alone cannot endure. Constantinople was never the end of my ambitions, it was the beginning. With the city secured, I turned my attention to expanding my empire in every direction. I campaigned in the Balkans, bringing Serbia fully under Ottoman control and pushing into Bosnia and Albania. I faced formidable opponents like Skanderbeg of Albania and Vlad the Impaler of Wallachia, warriors whose reputations were built on defying Ottoman power. Skanderbeg was perhaps the most frustrating enemy I ever faced. A former Ottoman general who had defected to lead Albanian resistance, he knew our tactics, our strengths, and our weaknesses. He fought a guerrilla war from mountain strongholds, refusing to meet me in open battle where my superior numbers would have crushed him. I led multiple campaigns into Albania, and while I captured several fortresses, I never succeeded in breaking Albanian resistance completely. Skanderbeg died undefeated, and Albania remained a thorn in my side throughout my reign. Vlad of Wallachia was another matter entirely. His cruelty was legendary, he impaled his enemies by the thousands, creating forests of stakes that stretched for miles. When I invaded Wallachia in 1462, I found the roads lined with the impaled bodies of Ottoman prisoners, a sight so horrific that even my hardened janissaries were shaken. Vlad's night attack on my camp nearly succeeded in killing me, and I was forced to withdraw after installing a more compliant ruler. It was one of the few campaigns I did not consider a complete success. But these setbacks were minor compared to my achievements. I conquered the empire of Trebizond on the Black Sea coast, ending the last remnant of Byzantine rule. I subjugated the Crimean Khanate, bringing it into my sphere of influence. I waged war against Venice, capturing many of their territories in Greece and the Aegean. I campaigned in Anatolia, consolidating Ottoman control over regions that had been contested for generations. I also turned my attention south and east. I intervened in the affairs of the Mamluk Sultanate, though I never achieved the decisive victory I sought against them. I established diplomatic relations with Persia, though our relationship was often tense. I even corresponded with European rulers, playing them against each other, encouraging their divisions while they feared my power. Yet I do not wish to be remembered only as a conqueror. War was necessary to build my empire, but it was not the purpose of my empire. I wanted to create a civilization that would rival Rome at its height, that would surpass the Abbasid Caliphate in its glory, that would be remembered not just for its military might but for its cultural achievements. I was a voracious reader and collector of books. I could read in 7 languages, and I commissioned translations of Greek, Persian, Latin, and Hebrew texts into Turkish and Arabic. I had scholars search Europe and Asia for rare manuscripts, and I established libraries in Istanbul that housed tens of thousands of volumes. Works of philosophy, science, history, poetry, and theology, I wanted all human knowledge gathered in my capital. I patronized artists and architects from across the known world. I commissioned the construction of mosques, palaces, bridges, aqueducts, hospitals, and caravanserais. The architectural style that developed during my reign, blending Byzantine, Persian, and Islamic influences, would define Ottoman architecture for centuries. The Fatih Mosque complex alone employed thousands of workers and craftsmen, and its madrasas educated generations of scholars. I invited Gentile Bellini, the famous Venetian painter, to my court. He painted my portrait, and I discussed with him the principles of perspective and realism that were revolutionizing European art. I commissioned the creation of illuminated manuscripts, decorated ceramics, intricate carpets, and masterworks of calligraphy. I wanted my court to be a place where beauty and learning flourished alongside military prowess. I reformed the legal system, codifying laws and establishing courts that administered justice fairly across my diverse empire. I standardized weights and measures, regulated trade, and established guilds to maintain quality in craftsmanship. I improved infrastructure, building roads and bridges that facilitated commerce and communication across my domains. I also reformed the Janissary Corps and the administrative structure of the empire. I created a system where talent and merit, not birth, determined advancement. A peasant's son could rise to become a vizier if he had ability and loyalty. A Christian boy, recruited through the Devshirme system and converted to Islam, could become a general or a governor. This meritocracy made my empire stronger and more dynamic than the hereditary aristocracies of Europe. Yet for all my achievements, I remained a solitary figure. The crown is a heavy burden, and it separates you from all humanity. I could not afford friends, only allies and servants. I could not afford trust, only vigilance and control. Every man who approached me wanted something, sought advantage, pursued his own ambitions through my favor. I executed my own infant brother to prevent civil war and ensure a clear succession. This act haunts me still, but I justified it as necessary for the stability of the empire. A divided succession would have torn apart everything I had built, would have wasted in civil war the resources I needed for conquest. I chose empire over family, duty over love. Whether Allah will forgive me for that choice, I do not know. I married several times, forming alliances through matrimony, but I never knew the simple comfort of a marriage based on affection rather than politics. My harem was populated by women from across my empire, yet I remained fundamentally alone. How could I share my fears, my doubts, my innermost thoughts with anyone when showing vulnerability might be interpreted as weakness? I had sons, but I could never be simply a father to them. They were potential heirs, future sultans, and I had to prepare them for the brutal realities of power. I was harsh with them, demanding, never satisfied with anything less than excellence. When my eldest son, Bayezid, showed promise, I felt both pride and a strange resentment. Pride that my dynasty would continue strong, resentment that my own time was finite, that eventually, I would be replaced. The loneliness of absolute power is something that cannot be understood by those who have never wielded it. You are surrounded by thousands of people, yet you are utterly alone. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every interaction is political. You can never let down your guard, never reveal your true self, never acknowledge uncertainty or fear. I am 53 years old now, and I feel the weight of my years. The campaigns have taken their toll on my body. Old wounds ache in cold weather. My eyesight is not what it once was. I have survived assassination attempts, battlefield dangers, and the stress of command that has prematurely aged me. I know that my time is limited, that the great adventure of life is approaching its end. What will I leave behind? An empire that stretches from the Danube to the Euphrates, from the Crimea to the Aegean. A capital city transformed from Byzantine Constantinople into Ottoman Istanbul, perhaps the greatest city in the world. A military reformed and strengthened, capable of projecting power across 3 continents. A culture that blends the best of East and West, Muslim and Christian, Turkish and Greek. A dynasty that will, I hope, rule for centuries to come. But will they remember Mehmed the Man, or only Mehmed the Conqueror? Will they know that I loved poetry as much as war, that I could spend hours discussing philosophy with scholars, that I felt awe standing in the Hagia Sophia? Will they understand that my cruelty was calculated, not casual, that every harsh decision was made for the empire's benefit, not personal satisfaction? I suspect they will remember only the conquest. That is how history works. It reduces complex men to simple narratives, transforms nuanced decisions into dramatic moments, forgets the doubts and fears that plague even the greatest leaders. I will be remembered as the Sultan who took Constantinople, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all that matters. But in my private moments, I think about the roads not taken, the choices that might have led to different outcomes. What if I had listened to Halil Pasha and withdrawn? Would I have preserved my army for other conquests, or would I have died known as the Sultan who came close but failed? What if Urban's great cannon had exploded before we breached the walls? What if European reinforcements had arrived in time? What if Emperor Constantine had agreed to surrender before the final assault? These speculations are pointless, I know. History follows the path it follows, and there is no going back. But they reveal something about me that I rarely acknowledge. I was not as certain of victory as I pretended to be. The confidence I projected to my men, the unshakable determination I showed in rejecting Halil Pasha's counsel, the bold predictions of inevitable triumph. These were partly performance, the mask that a leader must wear to inspire those who follow him. Inside, I had doubts. Inside, I feared failure. Inside, I questioned whether I was pursuing glory or courting disaster. But I could not let those doubts show, could not let fear paralyze me, could not let uncertainty undermine my purpose. So I buried the doubts deep, wore the mask of confidence, and drove forward as if success were ordained by heaven. And perhaps it was. Perhaps Allah truly did guide my hand, bless my cause, and fulfill the Prophet's promise through me. Or perhaps I was simply a man who refused to accept failure, who gambled everything on a single throw, and who happened to win. I will leave it to theologians and historians to decide. How wonderful that commander will be, and how wonderful that army will be. These words have followed me throughout my life. They were a blessing, but also a burden. They set an expectation that I could not fail to meet without betraying not just myself but the Prophet himself, peace be upon him. They made the conquest of Constantinople not merely a political or military objective but a religious obligation. I think sometimes about the commanders who came before me, who tried and failed to take Constantinople. Were they less faithful? Less capable? Less deserving? Or were they simply born at the wrong time, before the technology existed to breach those walls, before the political situation aligned to make conquest possible? I had advantages that my predecessors lacked. Gunpowder and cannons had transformed siege warfare. The Byzantine Empire had weakened to the point of collapse. European Christendom was too divided to mount an effective defense. The Ottoman Empire had reached a point of military and economic power that made a sustained siege feasible. In many ways, I was the right man at the right time, rather than a uniquely exceptional figure. But I also created my own advantages. I did not simply inherit a favorable situation, I shaped it. I built the Rumeli Hizari fortress to cut off Constantinople's supply lines. I recruited Urban and commissioned his cannons. I moved ships overland when the conventional approach failed. I maintained discipline and determination when others urged retreat. I was, perhaps, not uniquely great, but I was uniquely willing to do whatever was necessary to achieve my goal. If I could address future generations one last time, I would say this. I was Mehmed, son of Murad, of the house of Osman. I conquered Constantinople on May 29, 1453, fulfilling a dream that had eluded Muslim warriors for 8 centuries. I did this not through divine intervention alone, but through careful planning, technological innovation, strategic thinking, and an iron will that refused to accept defeat. I was not a perfect man. I was cruel when I deemed it necessary. I sacrificed personal relationships for political advantage. I executed rivals and enemies without hesitation. I waged wars that cost thousands of lives. I am guilty of all the crimes that conquerors commit in pursuit of empire. But I also built. I preserved. I created. I transformed Constantinople from a dying Byzantine city into a thriving Ottoman capital. I established institutions that would last for centuries. I patronized learning, art, and architecture. I brought together diverse peoples under a system that, while far from perfect, allowed for a degree of religious and cultural pluralism unusual for its time. I did not do this alone. My success was built on the sacrifices of thousands of soldiers who died in my service. It was enabled by the wisdom of advisors like Zaganos Pasha and the skill of engineers like Urban. It was supported by the loyalty of my subjects and the hard work of administrators, builders, and scholars. I was the commander, but they were the army, and the Prophet's blessing applied to all of us. When I entered the Hagia Sophia on that glorious day in May 1453, I sprinkled dust on my head to remind myself that I was mortal, that all glory is temporary, that even conquerors return to dust. That moment of humility is what I wish to be remembered alongside my triumph. I was blessed by fortune, empowered by circumstances, and granted the will to seize my moment. But I was also a man, fallible and finite, who happened to achieve something extraordinary. To future sultans, do not merely try to match my achievements. Surpass them. Build on what I have created. Expand the empire, but also deepen its culture, strengthen its institutions, improve the lives of its people. Conquest is glorious, but lasting civilization is the true measure of greatness. To historians, judge me fairly. Count my crimes alongside my achievements. Acknowledge my cruelty and my vision, my ambition and my accomplishments. I do not ask for mercy in your judgment, only for honesty. To the people of Istanbul, this city is my legacy to you and to the world. Treasure it, preserve it, and build upon its foundations. Constantinople was great, but Istanbul can be greater. The walls that I breached were not just physical barriers but psychological ones. They represented the belief that some things were impossible, that certain achievements were beyond human reach. I shattered that belief. Now it is your turn to push beyond what seems possible. As I look out over the city from my palace, I see the dome of the Hagia Sophia, now adorned with crescents instead of crosses. I see the bustling markets, the ships in the harbor, the walls that I breached and then restored. I see a city reborn, a civilization renewed, a dream fulfilled. Constantinople was never just a city. It was a symbol of empire, continuity, and the endurance of civilization. For 1,000 years, it represented the survival of Rome, the preservation of classical learning, the bastion of Christianity in the East. When I conquered it, I did not destroy that legacy, I inherited it. The Ottoman Empire became the successor to Rome, the preserver of order, the bridge between East and West. I often walked the streets of Istanbul in disguise, observing my city without the ceremony and deference that surrounds the Sultan. I see Greeks and Turks trading in the markets. I see Christian churches and Muslim mosques standing side by side. I see Jewish scholars engaged in theological debates. I see artisans creating beautiful objects, merchants conducting business, children playing in the streets. This is what I fought for, not just territory or glory, but the creation of a civilization where diverse peoples could live, work, and prosper together. The conquest was the means, not the end. The empire was the framework, not the purpose. The true achievement was building something that enhanced human flourishing, that added to the sum of human achievement, that left the world richer than I found it. Will my empire last forever? Of course not. All empires fall eventually. Rome fell. Byzantium fell. One day, the Ottoman Empire will fall too. But what we build, what we create, what we preserve, that has a chance of enduring beyond the lifespan of nations. The knowledge in our libraries, the beauty of our architecture, the traditions we establish, the ideas we spread, these can outlive empires. When I am gone, when my bones have turned to dust, when my name is ancient history, I hope that Istanbul will still stand, still thrive, still serve as a bridge between continents and cultures. I hope that people will walk through the streets I rebuilt and admire the buildings I commissioned. I hope that scholars will study the manuscripts I collected and artists will be inspired by the works I patronized. But most of all, I hope that someone, somewhere, will read about a 21-year-old sultan who stood before walls that had never fallen and refused to believe they were unbreakable. I hope they will draw courage from my example, not to conquer cities, but to pursue their own impossible dreams. I hope they will learn that determination, preparation, and will can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. I hope they will remember that on the 48th day of the siege, when wise and experienced men counseled retreat, when logic and caution suggested withdrawal, when prudence recommended compromise, I said no. I said that we would continue, that we would triumph, that we would achieve what 800 years of warriors had failed to accomplish. And I hope they will understand that this refusal, this stubborn, perhaps even foolish refusal to accept the verdict of impossibility, was what made all the difference. The Prophet promised that Constantinople would fall to Islam. But Allah does not achieve His purposes through magic or miracles alone. He works through human will, human effort, human determination. I was the instrument, but I had to choose to be that instrument. I had to accept the burden, endure the struggle, and refuse to quit when quitting seemed reasonable. This is my message to the ages: the impossible is only impossible until someone achieves it. The unconquerable can be conquered. The eternal can change. The future is not bound by the past. And when you stand before your Constantinople, whatever form it takes, do not listen to those who say it cannot be done. Prepare thoroughly. Plan carefully. Marshal your resources. Gather your allies. But when the moment comes, when you must choose between safety and glory, between preservation and transformation, between the known past and the unknowable future, choose boldly. Choose courageously. Choose with the full knowledge that you might fail, but with the determination that you will not fail because you gave up. I am Mehmed II, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, conqueror of Constantinople, Caesar of Rome, sovereign of the two seas. But before I was all of that, I was a young man with an impossible dream who refused to let that dream remain impossible. That is how I wish to be remembered. Not as the Sultan blessed by fortune, but as the man who made his own fortune. Not as the commander chosen by destiny, but as the commander who shaped destiny through his choices. Not as the conqueror who had no doubts, but as the conqueror who had doubts and overcame them. On May 29, 1453, I entered Constantinople not just through breached walls, but through breached impossibilities. That is my true conquest, the one that can never be taken from me, the one that will echo through time as long as humanity dreams of achieving the impossible. I am Mehmed the Conqueror, and this is my testament.